Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're wading into the murky world of Green Hags.
Always a fun time, right?
Yeah, you know me. I love me some creepy creatures. So to make sure we don't miss anything, we're sticking to the Forgotten Realms wiki as our main source.
A solid choice. It's got pretty much everything you need to know about these fascinating and frightening creatures.
Okay, so Green Hags, they're hags, but they're also green.
Right. Yeah. More than just a color, though. It's kind of like they embody this corruption of nature, like this sort of twisted version of the natural world.
Interesting. So not your typical fairy tale hag then.
Not always. I mean,
Yeah.
they can definitely rock the classic warty nose crone look if they want to.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they're masters of disguise.
Like seriously good.
Seriously good. They can blend right in looking like harmless old women, sometimes even beautiful.
Whoa, hold on. Beautiful, like drop dead gorgeous.
The lore says it's possible. It's all part of their cunning, you know? I guess that makes sense. If you're trying to lure someone into a trap, it's probably easier if you don't look like a monster, right?
Exactly. They use their disguises to get close to their victims, gain their trust, then bam, hag time.
Okay, so we've got disguises check. But why all the deception in the first place? What's their ultimate goal? What are they trying to achieve?
Well, in a nutshell, they want to see the world burn.
Literally. Like fire and brimstone and all that.
Not necessarily literally,
Oh.
but figuratively.
Oh, yeah.
They hate civilization. They despise order and beauty.
So it's not just random acts of evil. There's a plan.
Oh, there's always a plan with hags. But yeah, they want to replace everything humans have built with chaos and savagery. They want to see the world return to a more primal state.
And they think disguising themselves and tricking people is the best way to do that.
Definitely part of their strategy. But it goes deeper than that. They're driven by this intense hatred. You know, it's almost like a primal force within them.
You know, that reminds me of the whole Green Mary legend. Isn't she supposed to be like the first Green Hag?
Right. And she was a druid, wasn't she? This beautiful woman who got twisted into a hag because she disobeyed the laws of nature.
So it's not just that they hate civilization, it's like they feel betrayed by it somehow. Like humanity has violated something sacred.
That's a really interesting interpretation. And it makes you wonder about their motives. Are they just purely evil? Or are they acting out of some twisted sense of justice?
Man, that's heavy stuff.
Uh,
So let's say we're wandering through the realms and we want to avoid running into one of these hags. What should we be looking for? Any telltale signs?
well, they can change their appearance, but there are a few things that are harder to hide, like their skin, for example. It's usually got this green, almost bark-like texture to it.
Yikes.
Yep.
Okay, not exactly something you can cover up with makeup.
Ah.
And what about their teeth? I'm imagining some serious things.
You got it. Needle sharp and ready to tear into some unfortunate soul.
So basically, if you see an old woman with green skin and fangs, maybe don't ask for directions.
Probably a good rule of thumb. But here's the thing. They can also change their size and shape. So sometimes they're gaunt and withered. Other times they're more robust,
Robust, like what kind of robust are we talking?
like really robust, like almost obese. It's weird, right?
Super weird. I guess that just adds to their creepiness factor. Like you never know what you're going to get.
Exactly. That's part of what makes them so dangerous. They're constantly adapting, changing their appearance to suit their needs.
Speaking of dangerous, let's talk about their manipulation tactics. How far are they willing to go to get what they want?
Pretty far. I mean, think about it. They hate civilization.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to use any means necessary to disrupt it, to turn people against each other, to sow chaos and discord.
Okay, so we're talking mind games, psychological warfare, that kind of thing.
All of that and more. They're experts at playing on people's fears and weaknesses. They'll use illusions and trickery to lure victims into traps.
Like what kind of traps?
Oh, all sorts. They might disguise themselves as a beautiful woman to seduce a lonely traveler. Or they might impersonate a child to gain the sympathy of a kind-hearted villager.
Man, that's messed up. Using people's good nature against them like that.
It's pretty ruthless, right?
Yeah.
And they're not afraid to play the long game either. They'll infiltrate communities, spread rumors and lies, turn friends against each other, all to weaken the fabric of society.
So they're like puppet masters pulling the strings from the shadows.
Exactly. And they're incredibly patient. They'll wait years, even decades, to see their plans come to fruition.
So disguises check. Manipulation check. It's starting to sound like we're dealing with some serious supervillains here. What about their powers? What kind of magical abilities do they have?
No, they've got a whole bag of tricks.
Hmm.
Invisibility, mimicry, illusions. They can even drain your strength with a touch.
Seriously, just by touching you.
Yep. It's pretty nasty. They can literally sap your life force away.
Okay, now I'm officially creeped out. But if they're so powerful, Why all the sneaking around? Why not just waltz into a town and take over?
Well, here's the thing. Despite all their power, Green Hags are actually pretty cowardly in a straight-up fight.
Wait, really? That doesn't sound very hag-like.
I know, right? But it makes sense when you think about their strategy. They're all about minimizing risk and maximizing reward.
So they'd rather trick you into walking into a trap than face you head on.
Exactly. They'll use any advantage they can get. Their magic, the environment, your own fears.
So running away is a totally valid option when facing a green hag.
It's not a bad idea, though there are some hags who do actually train in combat or delve deeper into magic, but those are the exceptions.
So basically they're bullies who pick on the weak and run away when someone stands up to them.
That's a pretty good way to put it. But don't underestimate their power. Even if they are cowardly, they can still be incredibly dangerous, especially if you're not prepared.
All right, noted. So we've covered their looks, their motivations, their powers, and their fighting style. But where do they actually live? What kind of environments do they prefer?
Well, that's one of the things that makes them so adaptable. They can live practically anywhere. But their classic habitat is the swamp.
Makes sense. All dark and gloomy and full of creepy crawlies. It's like the perfect setting for a hag lair.
Right. And they often decorate their lairs in ways that would make your skin crawl. Think gnarled trees twisted into grotesque shapes, pools of stagnant water reflecting distorted images, and maybe a few skulls scattered around for good measure.
So basically my worst nightmare.
Pretty much, but it gets even creepier. They also have a habit of collecting strange and disturbing objects, like shrunken heads and jars full of eyeballs.
Okay, I'm officially never going near a swamp again. But what about their social lives? Do they ever hang out with anyone besides their victims?
Well, they're not exactly known for their warm and fuzzy personalities, but they do sometimes form alliances with other creatures, usually ones that are just as creepy and twisted as they are.
Like who?
Well, for starters, they love will-o-wisps. You know, those eerie balls of light that lure travelers to their doom.
Yeah, those are creepy. What's the connection there?
Well, the hags use them as scouts and distractions, and the will-o-wisps get to feed on the fear and despair that the hags create. It's a win-win for everyone. Well, except for the victims.
Grim but effective. What other creatures do they team up with?
Sometimes they'll work with evil druids, which is kind of ironic when you think about it, given their whole hatred of civilization thing.
Yeah, that is weird. Why would they work with someone who's basically a nature worshiper?
Well, remember, they're pragmatists.
Yeah.
They'll work with anyone if it serves their goals. And evil druids, well, they have access to nature's power. They know the secrets of the wilds, and sometimes they have a grudge against society themselves.
So even their friendships are based on manipulation and shared goals. It makes you wonder if they're capable of genuine connection at all.
That's a really interesting question, and it's one we'll explore further in part 2. We'll be right back after a quick break. Welcome back, folks. We're knee-deep in our exploration of Green Hags, and
Last we left off, we were talking about their less than friendly personalities and their interesting choice of allies.
right, will-o-wisps, evil druids. Not exactly the kind of folks you'd want to invite to a dinner party.
Definitely not. But it makes you wonder if they're even capable of having friends, or if it's all just manipulation and using others to further their own goals.
It's a good question. I mean, everything we know about them points to them being pretty solitary creatures.
But if they're so good at manipulating people, why haven't they just taken over the realms already? Surely someone's put up a fight.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not like they're running the show unopposed. There are plenty of forces working against them.
Like heroes, paladins and wizards and all that.
For sure. You've got your classic good versus evil going on. But it's more than that. It's not just about stopping the hags from doing evil. It's about protecting the balance of the world.
Right, because the hags want to destroy civilization and replace it with chaos.
Exactly. So anyone who values order and peace and all that good stuff is going to be opposed to the hags.
So it's not just heroes, it's anyone who wants to preserve the status quo.
Pretty much. And then you've got other creatures and factions with their own agendas. Dragons, liches, even some nasty goblins can cause trouble.
So it's like the hags are just one piece of the puzzle in this giant cosmic struggle.
Exactly. And sometimes those other factions, they clash with the hags. Maybe a dragon wants the same swamp the hag calls home, or a powerful wizard sees them as a threat to their own plans.
So it's like a big free-for-all out there, with everyone fighting for power and control.
You could say that. And then there's the hag's own nature to consider. They're so driven by hatred and pride that it can be their downfall.
How so?
Well, they can get reckless. They overestimate their own power. They underestimate their opponents.
Classic villain mistakes. You'd think they'd learn after a while.
You'd think so, right? But they keep making the same mistakes. And that's what keeps them in check.
So basically, they're their own worst enemies.
In a way, yes. But there's also something else to consider. Remember how we talked about them corrupting nature? Well, that doesn't go unnoticed.
You mean by the forces of nature themselves?
Exactly. Nature has its own ways of balancing things out. And if a hag goes too far, well, let's just say nature might have a few surprises in store for them.
Like what? Angry trees, raging storms.
All of that and more. The realms are full of nature spirits, ancient trees with a mind of their own, even elementals who embody the raw power of the elements.
So they're not just messing with humans, they're messing with the whole natural world.
Yep. And nature doesn't take kindly to being messed with.
I guess that makes sense. It's like they're poking a bear, and eventually that bear is going to wake up and fight back.
Exactly. And then there's always the element of chance. Sometimes things just happen.
You mean like bad luck?
Yeah. Maybe a crucial ingredient for their ritual gets lost, or a sudden storm floods their lair. You never know.
So even a hag can have a bad day.
Absolutely.
Heh.
And those little unexpected events, they can have a ripple effect, changing the course of history. Who knows? Maybe that one storm saved an entire village from being sacrificed.
It's a good reminder that even in a world full of magic and monsters, sometimes the smallest things can make a difference.
Exactly. And when you combine all these factors, the rivalries, the infighting, the wrath of nature, the unpredictable twists of fate, well, it starts to paint a picture of why Green Hags haven't quite achieved world domination.
Even though they seem to be everywhere.
Right. It's like they're constantly pushing against these unseen forces, trying to tip the scales in their favor, but never quite succeeding.
It's like they're playing a game they can't win.
In a way, yes. But that's what makes them so interesting. They're not just mindless monsters. They're cunning, ambitious, driven. But they're also limited by their own nature, by the forces arrayed against them, and by the simple fact that sometimes stuff just happens.
So it's like they're trapped in this cycle of chaos and destruction.
You could say that. But it's also a reminder that even in a fantasy world, things aren't always black and white. There are shades of gray, there are unexpected turns, and sometimes even the villains have their own challenges to face.
That's a good point. It makes them seem a little bit more human.
Maybe. Or maybe it just makes them more relatable. After all, we all face challenges in our lives. We all have our own demons to battle.
True enough. But let's not get too sympathetic to the hags. They're still pretty nasty creatures.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
But understanding their motivations and their limitations helps us to better appreciate their role in the world.
And maybe even defeat them?
Exactly. Knowledge is power. And the more we know about Green Hags, the better equipped we are to deal with them.
Speaking of dealing with them, what happens to those unlucky enough to get captured by a hag? The wiki wasn't very specific about that.
Right. Well, let's just say it's not pretty.
Come on, give us some details. We can handle it.
Okay, okay. But don't say I didn't warn you. Green Hags have a certain fondness for ingredients, and not all of them are herbs and mushrooms.
Okay, that's a little vague. What kind of ingredients are we talking about?
Let's just say they're interested in the essence of life, in the things that make us human. And the rituals, well, they're not for the faint of heart.
You're really being cryptic here.
Some things are better left to the imagination. But trust me, you don't want to end up in a hag's cauldron.
All right, message received. But before we move on to even more horrifying topics, I have a question about their society. If they're so common, why haven't they just overrun the realms already?
Ah, that's the million gold piece question. And it's one we'll tackle when we return for the final part of our deep dive. All right, so we're back and ready to tackle that million gold piece question.
Yeah, why haven't Green Hags taken over the realms already? I mean, they're everywhere.
It does seem strange, doesn't it? When you really think about it, there are a lot of factors at play.
Like what?
Well, first of all, the realms are a pretty diverse place,
Mhm.
right? Lots of different creatures, factions, power dynamics.
So it's not just a simple case of hags versus everyone else.
Right, it's way more complicated than that. You've got dragons hoarding their treasure liches, plotting in their towers, all sorts of stuff going on.
So it's like the hags are just one part of this big, messy, chaotic world.
Exactly. And sometimes those other factions, those other power players, they clash with the hags.
Like over territory or resources.
Yeah, or maybe just because they don't like each other. You know how it is. Sometimes personalities just clash.
Makes sense. So the hags aren't always the top dogs. They've got competition.
Definitely. And that competition keeps them in check to some extent.
Yeah.
But there's also their own nature to consider.
Right. We talked about how they're driven by hatred and pride and all that.
And those things can be their downfall. They can make them reckless, arrogant, overconfident,
So basically, they trip over their own egos.
pretty much. And then there's the whole nature thing.
Right, the whole corrupting nature thing.
And that has consequences. Nature has a way of pushing back, you know?
So like angry trees and stuff?
Yeah, or maybe something even weirder. The realms are full of nature spirits, elementals, ancient beings who are very protective of the natural order.
So if the hags go too far, these forces might intervene.
Exactly. And then there's always just plain old bad luck.
Like, what a bad hair day.
Maybe. But I'm talking about those unexpected events that can throw a wrench in even the best laid plans.
So a crucial ingredient goes missing. A storm floods their lair, that kind of thing.
Yeah, stuff like that. You can't plan for everything.
And those little things can have big consequences.
They can change the course of history. Who knows? Maybe that one missing ingredient saved an entire kingdom.
It's a good reminder that even in a world of magic and monsters, sometimes the smallest things can make a difference.
Absolutely. And when you add it all up, the competition, the infighting, the wrath of nature, the unpredictable twists of fate, well, it starts to make sense why Green Hags haven't taken over the world.
It's like they're constantly trying to swim upstream.
Exactly. They're pushing against these powerful forces and they're never quite able to get ahead.
So it's not just that they're evil, it's like they're fighting a losing battle.
And that's what makes them so fascinating. They're not just mindless monsters.
Yeah.
They're complex creatures with their own motivations and struggles.
And maybe even a little bit tragic.
Maybe. But let's not forget, they're still dangerous. And they're still out there plotting and scheming.
So we need to be prepared, right?
Always. Knowledge is power. The more we understand about Green Hags, the better equipped we are to deal with them.
Well, I think we've learned a lot today. We've covered their looks, their motivations, their powers, their habitats, even their strange alliances.
And we've explored the reasons why, despite all their cunning and ambition, they haven't managed to take over the realms.
So it's a good reminder that even in a fantasy world, things aren't always black and white. There are shades of gray, there are unexpected turns, and sometimes even the villains have their own challenges to face.
And that's something to keep in mind, whether you're facing a Green Hag in your next D&D campaign or just navigating the complexities of real life.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Green Hags. Until next time, may your dice rolls be ever in your favor.